For more context, I advise watching my 2-minute announcement video first. Please feel free to use the time codes on screen to skip to your favourite part of the video. Enjoy. As some of you may know, I made a little announcement video not too long ago. Actually, when was that uploaded? April 18th? Oh, that's not too bad. Of 2018? Yikes! Needless to say, it took a lot out of me to finally get this video made, but it feels good to finally have that 2-year weight off my shoulders. Thank you to the collaborators involved for being so patient while I get my act together. Right, so, Ratchet Clank, an iconic PlayStation franchise beloved to many including myself. I'm assuming most people watching this would have been subscribed to me for a while and are already aware of my love for this franchise, but for any newcomers, let me quickly fill you in. I am a lifelong die-hard Ratchet & Clank fan. I grew up playing each and every game on every console available. I've collected special editions, memorabilia, merchandise including books, comics and nightmarish plushies, and it was thanks to my videos on the PlayStation Vita port of Q-Force that gave a big boost to my channel. Needless to say, I have a strong connection with the series and I have a lot to be grateful for. I've always enjoyed having conversations with friends about various titles, taking deep dives into upcoming releases and revisiting old titles. A conversation that was relevant at the time of my aforementioned announcement video, and is even more so now, is what is next for the Ratchet & Clank series? A lot of what will be covered in this video is from my original notes in 2018, and although a lot of it's still relevant, a lot has also changed, so I'll be interested to see what is and isn't still relevant. The way I see it, we have 3 major likely candidates for an upcoming title, which I will be breaking down into details as well as probability. The first outcome that a lot of us expected would be a reimagining of the second game in the series, Going Commando, or Locked and Loaded in my country. With the 2016 title being a fresh take on the original game storyline, it only makes sense to then follow it up with an interpretation of the second game, following Ratchet & Clank as they set out to save the Bogon Galaxy from the threat of the Proto-Pets. Quark disguised as the villainous Mr. Fizzwidget, and Angela being a living plot hole. Unlikely. If you're already familiar with the original game storyline, as well as the 2016 game story, then you'll know that there's enough differentiation between the two so that the events don't really line up with each other. For example, in the new timeline, Quark and Ratchet are seemingly still on good terms, and yeah, if old Quark was in the same position as current Quark, then sure, I could see him turning evil and wanting revenge again, but this new guy seems like he's on the straight and narrow, and I couldn't really see him being full-on villain again. Speaking of villains, now we've already got Dr. Nefarious in his robotic form, so that would indicate an Up Your Arsenal storyline. Also, the existence of Angela would just continue to complicate things even further. So even though the popular consensus back in 2016 was we were in for a Going Commando remake next, it doesn't seem likely to occur. Though Insomniac were indirectly stoking the flames by mentioning the second game more than usual on social media. Personally, I never brought into the idea of a straight up retread of Locked and Loaded. I feel it was more newer fans that were expecting that outcome. So if we're not getting a straight up retelling of Locked and Loaded, then what are we more likely to see? Well, the second outcome that I predict is most likely is a sequel to the 2016 game. No duh, Dervinator, I hear you say. Of course we've got to get a sequel to the latest game. Well, just hold on a minute. To the uninitiated, it would seem like the de facto choice. But just remember, there are like another 12 or 13 games in the franchise that all have their own somewhat continuing storylines before this one came out. But we'll get back to that later. But now let's talk about the game we're almost certain to get. A sequel to the 2016 reimagining with its own unique story, villains, characters, etc. I've got to deviate ever so slightly to bring up an important topic of discussion regarding the PlayStation 4 game. I will attempt to condense an 8-page video essay into a little paragraph. When the game came out, long-time fans couldn't help but being disappointed. Many of us enjoyed what it was, but longed for what it could have been. So many missing worlds from the original, a watered down plot with reduced characters and reused weapons, lack of extras like arenas, skill points and such. However, it was a smash hit, drawing in the biggest crowd of newcomers to date, so many people who had never even touched the franchise were taking advantage of this as a jumping on point. But that doesn't change how many of us felt. Although I believe all of this is in service of the fact that, in its essence, this is essentially a video game movie. The tagline of "play the game based on the movie based on the game" couldn't be more accurate. It wasn't a reboot, but an adaptation of the movie, which in itself was based loosely on the 2002 game. I mean, heck, the game was delayed due to the movie being pushed back. All of this to say that the development and vision of Insomniac was restricted by the limitations of the film. A 90-minute family animated comedy can't have 20 planets, space exploration, arena battles, gold bolt hunting. With this in mind, it's actually a miracle they managed to squeeze enough content to this movie tie-in game. It could have been so much worse. So getting back on topic, it would be so cool to see what the team could come up with now that they have free reign and full creative control again. If you remember back to how revolutionary A Crack in Time was with its overhauled ship combat and space exploration, as well as the completely redesigned Clank gameplay. Originality, innovation, bigger, better, PlayStation 5. That's something that wasn't even a thought in my brain back in 2018 when I first drafted this video, but theoretically, the PlayStation 5 should hold a whole new ton of surprises for the Insomniac Games team to explore. Ratchet VR, maybe? Well, I mean, hey, Heroes on the Move, or whatever it's called, was a fun foray into PlayStation Move, so I'd be up for it. Anyway, something else that hadn't occurred to me back in 2018 was that the follow-up to the reimagining could still have its own unique story, but also incorporate elements of Locked and Loaded into it. Say you've got a new villain that needs to be stopped, but they just happen to also have an evil plan that revolves around unleashing a proto-pet menace on the galaxy. Heck, it could even be the real Mr. Fizz widget. I think incorporating elements of Locked and Loaded into an inevitable sequel could be a cool idea, but I'd still prefer a ton of originality. More than likely, this is what we're eventually going to get. And finally, because I dare to dream, I present to you the third possible outcome for the next game in the franchise. A proper, full-length, satisfying conclusion to the phenomenal Future Saga. Yes, Into the Nexus was technically intended to be an ending to that storyline, but being completely honest, there was nowhere near a satisfying conclusion to the story. By no means a bad game, Nexus was a short mini-adventure that felt like it was hastily cobbled together and had its own separate plot about the Prog Twins shuffled in with something to do with the Dimensionator, and I don't know, that's kind of it. Whatever so-so ending to a brilliant dramatic story that you'd have to be mad or just a hint pretentious to not enjoy. I honestly can't believe that we went from the highs of 2.5 great back-to-back games in the PS3 era, the Future Saga, weaving an epic story on an intergalactic scale, something more than just the traditional good guy saves the day plot, to a couple of questionably canon spin-offs, a short, unsatisfying conclusion and a movie tie-in. When looking at the series as a whole, the last truly great game was 10 years ago. That's insane. Sure, I and many others enjoyed All for One, Full Frontal Assault, Nexus, and the reimagining, but it just seems like it's been so long since we've been truly blown away by a Ratchet & Clank game. Outside of these stunning visuals. Getting back on topic, I'd personally love to see the original creative vision for the storyline brought to life. Actually wrap up the story of the Lombax race, Tachyon, Azimuth, the Great Clock, so much left by the wayside. Now, there are reasons and theories for the derailment of the franchise that I want to touch on a little bit, but just to reiterate, because I tend to ramble, I would wholeheartedly love to see everything that was set up in Tools of Destruction and expanded on in A Crack in Time play out in a satisfying way, both gameplay and storytelling. Even with the unresolved nature of Nexus, the creators clearly had something in mind with the little tease of Clank holding onto the Dimensionator, hinting that the story isn't over yet. But then, what happened? Before I answer that question, you've all heard what I want from a new game, so it's only fair that we hear from other fans of the franchise. Back in my 2018 video, I reached out to anyone and everyone to share their thoughts and feelings on the future of the franchise and what they would like to see. So I just wanted to highlight a few of them now, as well as share the stage with a few special guests. First up, the legend himself, Nathaniel Fogar, said he'd love to see a sequel after Into the Nexus, which will start a trend you're about to see. Mac HR would also like to see the series return to the scale of A Crack in Time. After a bit of banter, my good friend William suggested that the next game return to its comedy roots and perhaps not try so hard to pander to children, as he felt it was an annoyance in the reboot, as he calls it. And whilst I understand why they went that direction, what with it being based on a G-rated family film, it left no less of an impact, especially considering that the kiddie stuff all but replaced anything appealing to an older audience. Unfortunately, I don't have a screenshot of this one because the person either deleted their comment or deleted the account it was posted under, but regardless, I do recall somebody suggesting a Ratchet & Clank Battle Royale, and as much as I think that the Battle Royale genre is a slight trend in the history of gaming, just like movie tie-ins and first-person shooters were, and it'll probably be gone in the next 5 or so years, I don't actually think it's a terrible idea. After all, the Ratchet & Clank multiplayer was incredibly fun in Ratchet & Clank 3. I didn't get to play much of Gladiator, but I assume it'd be quite the same, so you just take that to a bigger scale, 100 players in the Ratchet & Clank universe using all the creative weapons and gadgets. I think there's a potential there. Do I really want to see that? No, it's probably the same as the PlayStation Home game, if anyone remembers that long dead thing, but yeah, it could work. For what it's worth, in the comment section under part 3 of my Ratchet & Clank Let's Play from 2017, which is essentially an unscripted precursor to this video if you're curious, No Idea expressed their wishes to see a full-length adaptation of Quest for Booty, an unusual wish for sure, but one that holds no less potential. After all, more game equals more value. Well, most of the time. Plus trophies! Michael Dunlap expanded upon that further by stating, I would love Insomniac to make Tools of Destruction, Quest for Booty, A Creek in Time, and Into the Nexus on PS4. Yes, although I think we're unlikely to get that outcome, it just seems too good to be true. Whether you consciously suggested Insomniac specifically or not, it would be interesting to see them handle the porting process rather than one of the smaller developers like Mass Media or Idle Minds. Good old VVNT showing some support. And finally, we have a great suggestion by Terra of Talos. I love that name, by the way. He says, I'm very passionate about Ratchet & Clank as well. As for the next game, I expect Insomniac to start working on it right after they finish with Spider-Man. Thing is, the direction they may take is undecided according to their live streams, but I have a feeling they'll go back to the OG timeline despite the new amount of fans from the PS4 game, as staying in the movie timeline makes no sense seeing as it was generally poorly reviewed. Hassan follows up with they can easily go back to the OG timeline, they just need to do a Tools of Destruction route with a new galaxy, new threats, and new characters. I love both of these suggestions, not only because they align with what I would like to see, a continuation of the Future Saga, but it really is an interesting thought that the developers would all but abandon the PlayStation 4 storyline because the movie didn't do as well, even though the PS4 had a little cliffhanger setting up for a sequel. Then again, so did Nexus have a little cliffhanger setting up for the sequel. And unless we're going to see some Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, epic, grand, parallel universe colliding super into the Ratchet-verse, where you get Mikey Kelly back to voice original Ratchet, you get the PlayStation 2 Ratchet, you get the little handheld version, and then you get the guy from the Future series, and they all bump into the one from the PS4, because sure, that's all one continuity, but it's all over the place, separate branching paths, certain aspects are and aren't canon, and it's just, I'm getting way ahead of myself. I really enjoyed reading everybody's suggestions and was happy to share them with the audience. Now for the first of 3 special collaborators who have been working with me on this product. First up is Arcaedon Luminos.
Thank you, Dervinator. Personally, I'd like the series to continue from Into the Nexus, with Clank having fixed the Dimensionator so that Ratchet can continue his search for the Lombaxes. Traveling to another dimension would be a breath of fresh air for the series, as it would mean no more reused weapons, like the Combustor and Mr. Zircon that many of us have grown tired of using over the years. I also really want to see what the Lombax planet looks like, and I bet it could rival Metropolis in terms of visuals. Insomniac may still be hesitant to explore that storyline, but they better conclude that arc at some point. Another wish of mine would be an old school styled RNC game with the badass music and clever humor of the PS2 games. I'd also like to revisit the Solana and Bogon galaxies and maybe have them both featured in the same game. I doubt that Insomniac could pull this style off well today though, looking at their most recent RNC titles. That's the main reason why I don't want another remake. Sure, recreating Going Commando would make me feel super nostalgic and it would definitely be fun to play, but at the same time, I think it would ruin the image of its original form, like the 2016 version did to the first game. At least they won't make another movie, considering the first one flopped horribly. My final wish is an open world RNC game, which I think would work really well for the series, which has already been proved by planets like Sargasso and Thram. However, this would take it even further, with a gigantic world to explore. I'm thinking it could have lots of different environments, like forests, jungles, swamps, volcanoes, snowy mountains, and facilities and factories. Gadgets like the hover boots, robo-wings, and jetpack would be really helpful to traverse the map faster. You would also be able to interact with a bunch of fan-favorite NPCs. In fact, the game would pretty much be a tribute to the whole franchise. So, those were my 3 wishes for the continuation of the series. Back to you, Dervinator.
Thank you, Arcaedon. Wow, your editing is so good, it puts mine to shame. I'm glad I'm not alone in wanting to see a continuation of my favourite storyline, but I also never considered the possibility of an open world Ratchet & Clank game. Wow, the possibilities are enough to get excited and wanting to see that come to fruition. Thank you for being a guest in my video. And now I open the floor to another channel many of you may be familiar with herself, RedRatchet.
Hey fellas, it's Red, and before I say anything about how I personally see the future of the Ratchet & Clank series, I just wanted to say thank you to the Dervinator and all the radically cool Ratchet & Clank fans out there. Like, you guys are all so neat, like, yeah. Now, we all know how the PS4 game went. I think that it's honestly a very mixed game regarding how the fan base reacted to it, and that's how I personally felt as well.
Put your hands down. You look ridiculous.
It was disappointing, but not really that bad of a game. What I think would be most interesting, and what I'd love to see if the next game takes place after Into the Nexus or the Future Saga. I'm not just saying that because of all those stories that were built up within basically a decade, but also because of the potential in gameplay. I'd love to see gameplays like the space exploration and A Crack in Time come back, along with, like, I don't know, something like the Giant Clank gameplay, because they can just be so much more expanded upon, you know? And I also feel like if the next game in the series were to take place after the Future Saga, we get this possibility of seeing PlayStation 2 characters like Angela Cross, Sasha, you know, the Q-Force, you know, the OGs, Big Al, you know, interacting with the PlayStation 3 characters, similarly with how the 6-issue comic did it, I guess. I would also be fine with a Going Commando reimagining, because at least it won't be held back by a movie, which was really the big issue of the PS4 game. However, if Insomniac does go with a Going Commando reimagining, it'll definitely be very different from that original game, with elements like Captain Cork clearly not being evil anymore, the Galactic Rangers, being introduced a lot earlier, and the character Shiv. Yeah, it makes me a bit nervous on how that might be handled, but either way, whatever is the next Ratchet & Clank game, I'm sure it'll be fantastic, and it'll be pretty memorable. Again, thank you, Durbinator, this was really cool, and I probably would ramble longer, but gotta cut it, you know what I'm saying?
You are more than welcome. Oh man, I spent so much time talking about the story aspects of a possible sequel and barely considered the limitless gameplay potential. Thank you for sharing such incredible ideas. Now I really want to see the two generations interconnect. And last but certainly not least, the Golden Bolt is taking time out of his busy schedule to share his potential predictions for a PlayStation 5 title.
When it comes to the future of the Ratchet & Clank franchise, I don't have any real specific wants as far as these games go. I'm pretty easy. I would like to see them follow the Into the Nexus storyline rather than following the Movieverse storyline, and that's what they're going to do. I can guarantee you they're not going to follow the movie storyline. They're going to follow the timeline of sorts. I'd like to see them do that in a similar style to Tools of Destruction, where it's a soft-ish reboot rather than, bringing back every character that's super unnecessary at this point in the franchise. And I have a reason for that I'll discuss in a minute. But otherwise, I don't really have any whats, as in, what is it that you want to see from the series? I'm good. Just make a game, I'll buy it, I'll like it. What I do have instead are a when and a how. And the when ties into why I want this to be a sort of Tools of Destruction styled, soft, not really a reboot, but kind of a new beginning. I want to see the next Ratchet & Clank game launch in November 2020 as a PlayStation 5 launch title. The reason I want it to be, a sort of new beginning for the series is obviously with a new console, you're gonna have new buyers, you're gonna have, new fans of the series that may not have played previous games, and considering that the PS3 Ratchet & Clank games still haven't been remastered on PS4, I think another new beginning is the best way to go for the series. You can still bring back Ratchet, Clank, Quirk, maybe Nefarious, whatever. But I think if you look at the Ratchet & Clank series history, it's only had one proper sort of launch title over the years, and that was Size Matters on the PSP. It's no coincidence that that game was the highest selling game in the series until the PS4 game. So to have a big, family-friendly launch title for their new console from a known entity like Ratchet, from a series that people are begging for another game, it just makes sense to me for Sony, for Insomniac, and for the series. As for the how, I would like to see Insomniac's VR team take a shot at expanding the Ratchet & Clank game on PS5 with a VR mode, or a VR alternate storyline, or hell, another smaller VR game entirely. I think if you look at Insomniac's VR team, they're incredibly acclaimed for their Oculus work. I haven't played their Oculus games, so I can't say personally. It's Insomniac. Again, they kind of make good games. So I would like to see them, especially if we're launching a new console, they're gonna try and pack in VR somehow into one of the bundles, probably, a $600 super bundle or whatever. If you have Ratchet & Clank compatible with both PSVR and the PS5 at launch, in a world where there's not gonna be a ton of PS5 exclusive launch titles, that's asking to print money. And I think it just makes sense when you look at the fact that, at least to me, Ratchet & Clank is kind of the Mario of PlayStation. It's the family-friendly franchise that's well recognized worldwide, both in the US, in Europe, especially in Japan. Ratchet & Clank is huge everywhere, and that's rare for a Western mascot, especially in Japan. So to have that franchise that you can rely on, but also that you can experiment with in the same way that Mario loves to experiment over the years, I think that to have a Ratchet & Clank game that continues to follow in the mold of All for One and Quest for Booty and Full Frontal Assault and do some experimental stuff, especially with VR, this bubbling sort of there, sort of not for PlayStation, it would just make sense to me. And it would be nice to have a AAA VR game pretty much for the first time. I'm not going to count Skyrim because A, it's not exclusive, and B, it looks like a PS2 game in VR. Astrobot's not really a AAA game, though I love Astrobot. I just think that Ratchet would be the best bet, both for the PS5 and for the PSVR, and also for Insomniac and for the franchise. So yeah, that's my wants for the future of Ratchet & Clank. Either way, I'm looking at it. I think there's an incredibly bright future ahead for this series, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Just talking about next-gen possibilities is enough to get me excited. Now here's hoping that if we do get a PlayStation 5 launch title, then Insomniac Games deliver us another mind-blowing, revolutionary entry into the series and acts as an essential system seller. Thank you very much for contributing, it was an honour to have you on board. These are all such great ideas and I love seeing the passion behind them. This is a franchise that's been going on for so long that for many people such as myself, we've grown up alongside them, and let's be honest, it's an easy series to love, a 3D action platformer with a game on every console. The PS2, PSP, PS3, PS Vita and PS4. But with so many games it may seem daunting to a newcomer trying to decide where to start from, which is something I'll reluctantly give the 2016 game credit for, only because it may encourage them to go back and experience what better games the series has to offer. Speaking of having so many games in the series, I'd like to circle it back around to the question I proposed earlier and discuss another important topic. What happened to the consistency of the series, and why are we now experiencing such long gaps between games? Well, honestly, this could be a video unto itself, but I really wanted to talk about it here. The way I see it, there are two major contributing factors. Number one is burnout, both on the side of the developers and the consumers. Insomniac had been working on Ratchet & Clank games non-stop for 10 years. They cranked out 10 games back to back in 11 years. Sure, some of them were smaller and there were other developers handling spin-offs, but that is a long time to be working on the same IP, and honestly, they deserve every commendation they earned, putting out consistently great products each and every time. As I always say, there are no bad Ratchet & Clank games, just some rubbish ports. There have been several instances of people on the team indirectly hinting at the fact that although everyone is still fully committed and giving 100%, they felt there was nowhere left to go. Which is a real shame, because that explains how we went from arguably the biggest and best game to a family-friendly 4-player romp that treats its story like a joke, a short tower defense game, this, and then the whole reimagining situation. Not to mention it didn't help that distinguished and reputable sources like IGN would say things like, "Oh, Nexus is a perfectly fine game, but I just can't find interest in it because there are too many games." It still infuriates me to this day. Another aspect that wasn't even a consideration in my 2018 draft script was Insomniac's Spider-Man game. Obviously they were taking time off Ratchet & Clank so they could develop that game, and they must have loved doing it because it was a huge smash hit, garnering almost unanimous positive praise and all but guaranteeing a sequel. The lack of inspiration for something they've been consistently churning out for a decade compared to the unprecedented success of Spider-Man isn't going to provide much incentive or motivation to go back outside of loyalty, and that's one thing that I'll always appreciate Insomniac Games for. Their love for their creation. Sucker Punch don't care about Sly, Naughty Dog couldn't give less of a damn about Jak and Daxter, but Insomniac will always support Ratchet. The second biggest reason is more of a light conspiracy theory, but one I feel makes perfect sense. Overexposure to the series brought on by yearly releases isn't going to drum up much buzz when a new title is released. I refer you to that stupid IGN thing. But think about it, in 2013, if they announced another full-length Ratchet & Clank game, sure, fans would be excited, and it may bring in some more, newcomers to the series. But compare that to, say, if they announced a new Jak and Daxter game, it would be huge! Journalists would be writing articles, YouTubers would be making videos, pre-orders would be going wild. There would be serious hype because it had been so long since anyone had seen an entry in that franchise. And believe it or not, we saw the exact same thing happening with Crash Bandicoot's Insane trilogy and the Spyro Reignited trilogy back when I was first planning to make this video. The longer a series has gone without a new installment, the more nostalgic and excited people will be when one is eventually announced. There's a reason people went crazy over Kingdom Hearts 3, Final Fantasy 7, Half-Life Alyx, Shenmue 3? So yeah, if Insomniac want to take some time off, develop a sequel to Spider-Man, forget that Sunset Overdrive and Fuse ever existed, and then eventually come back to their most iconic franchise with fresh eyes, feeling reinvigorated, then yeah, I would sooner have that outcome than, say, it end up like a dead franchise with no hope for the future, like Sly Cooper. Oh Garen, I'm so sorry. Hashtag free Sly from Egypt. And that about brings this long-awaited video to a close. I want to give some massive thanks to everybody who contributed back in 2018 when I first announced this, and to those who have supported me non-stop for the last 2 years. Thank you so much to my partner for encouraging me to finally make this video happen. Thank you to Heavy Eyed, a fellow Kiwi content creator who, without knowing it, helped me get over some serious mental barriers that were stopping me from getting this video made. See, I had every intention of creating this video immediately after I announced it, but I didn't get the reception I was hoping for. Several other people made identical videos with way better editing. I wanted to make it perfect, but I knew that was going to be impossible with the equipment I had at hand, and it was thanks to his video that I realized I'm never going to be able to make this perfect product I've got in my head, so I might as well just do what I can, so thank you. Thank you very much to RedRatchet for agreeing to be a part of this video at the last minute. And to the Golden Bolt, please join me in showing support by checking out their channels. And finally, I want to give the biggest thank you to Arcaedon Luminos. This guy was one of the first people to respond to my original announcement video. He even went so far as to send through a fully edited video clip before I'd even finished my original draft. And he's been fully supportive of the last 2 years of me mucking around avoiding getting this video made. So thank you all very much for watching. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the video. Please feel free to let me know what you think of the future of the franchise in the comments below. And once more, a huge thank you to Arcaedon Luminos for being a part of this project. Please go check out his channel. His content is so entertaining and professional. And seriously, what are you doing on my channel? Go check him out.
Thanks again, Dervinator.
You're still here?
Well, I never went anywhere. I'm not in the Ratchet plushie.
Oh, yeah, of course.